I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call roll.
Mrs. Dobas,
Here.
Mr. Christensen,
Here.
Ms. Roll, Mr. McGregor,
Here.
Mr. Modrak,
Here.
Mr. Nagel,
Here.
Mrs. Turner,
Here.
Mr. Spicuzza,
Present.
Mr. Scalzo.
Here.
8 here, 1 absent.
At this time, we're going to have a presentation from the municipality about Peter Page Park project. Mr. Christensen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, school board directors, Dr. Walsh, school district staff, residents. My name is Lawrence Christian, and I work in the municipality of Bethel Park. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come and address the board this evening concerning this project. If you'll indulge me a little bit, I'd like to take you back to June 20th, 2018. The night Bethel Park experienced a devastating flood event. Bethel Park and the surrounding communities received over 5 rains in a 2-hour time frame. There were over 450 calls for flooding from residential homes and businesses. There were numerous homes and businesses that underwent varying degrees of flooding, and many that needed remediation, rebuilding, and some even needed dying. This single event required the municipality of Bethel Park to spend over $900,000 on repairing municipal infrastructure alone. Almost immediately, the staff began looking for locations where stormwater projects could be completed, with the critical requirement that be on the property. The municipality completed phase 1 of these projects, which included improvements in enlarging the 2 existing ponds in the industrial park, increasing the flow capacity by over 1 million gallons. New underground tanks and ponds were added to Birch Tree Park and Oak Tree Park, effectively containing several 100,000 more gallons of water. The goal of these projects is to hold back water at various locations throughout the municipality. The more water that can be held upstream during a rain event helps the downstream residents. And when that rain subsides, it provides critical time for our downstream residents to recover. That upstream water can then be slowly released after the rain event has passed. On May 28, 2019, the staff presented a plan to school improvements at Peter Page Park. This included a retention pond to be located behind the football field along the stream. The area downstream of this park received significant flooding disruption. By using the same logic for phase 1 projects, we want to hold back water if possible. At that May meeting, you, the members of the board that were present, approved the project. However, we have redesigned the project and made some significant improvements to the original concept. Today we have Mark Skocek with Gateway Engineers to help explain the new proposal. After we review the plan, the municipality is requesting either an easement or the part of the pond that extends past Peter Page Park onto school district property or the school district.
This might be better.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Or the school district can transfer the small piece of land to the municipality. With your indulgence, I'll now turn it over to Mark Skocek to review the redesigned project.
Okay. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I believe the previous design that you may have seen, we were trying to do smaller ponds to try to control the water that comes through this area. And we found that it's going to be better if we take the smaller storms and just allow them to flow through as they do historically, but build an embankment so that the water for the bigger storms can pond up behind this, and we let less of a peak rate go downstream, and we'll hold back that water and let it slowly over time release downstream, thus, less adversely impacting the people. There are approximately 300 acres of drainage area tributary to this stream that comes through here. We have this redesigned embankment is going to be about 14 feet high above the baseball field. we're going to install a culvert underneath of that that's going to follow the general alignment of the existing stream so that kind of your everyday storms, you know, 1-year storm, 2-year storm, 10-year storm, will continue to flow through as it historically has, and it'll continue on downstream as it did. But when we get these big storm events, this pipe will actually act as a choke, and the water will start to pond up behind the embankment, and that 36-inch pipe or box culvert, whatever the final design ends up being, will slowly release that water downstream. In addition to providing flood control, we are also going to do like a wetlands mitigation through here, and we're going to restore that stream as well because it is pretty heavily eroded over time. With this embankment and design, you know, we're approximating for the 50-year and 100-year storm events, which are the big events, we can get about a 40 to 50% reduction in the peak rate downstream. The ponding area, when it's full, is going to hold about 750,000 cubic feet of water, which is about 5.6 million gallons. And anything over and above those storm events will go through a stabilized spillway over on this side. It'll avoid the baseball field. It'll flow through this spillway and continue on down the stream as it normally would. The next one, if we want to take these clips off.
So before you flip it over, will you turn it around so that the audience can see it? And the camera is actually in the back of the room. So if you would point out where that structure is again, please.
This will be the embankment. This is the existing baseball field. This is the existing football field. The stream flows in this direction. We're going to install a culvert through that stream and build about a 14 to 18 foot embankment over top of it. And there will be an emergency spillway over here, which will direct any flows over and above the 100-year through that spillway and on downstream, and it'll stay away from the ball fields.
Could you show us one thing on here also? You mentioned the wall you're going to build. Does that, it obviously must run perpendicular to the stream, but on the side of the softball field, does it also run parallel to the stream as well at that 14 to 18 foot?
It
Can
does.
you just show the outline of where that goes?
This is the existing grade at the ball field. I think there might be like a scoreboard or something back there. I'm not sure. Yeah. And then right behind that, the embankment will start going up 14 feet high, and there's a 10-foot wide berm at the top, okay. And then we'll just go back down into the existing.
How are we going to get the emergency vehicles back there? Because that's part of the way that the emergency vehicles get back there now on that upper softball field. And you cannot come in from the lower parking lot through IMS. They can't get through.
This is down by.
Do they come down this way?
Oh, this is Perky, okay.
This is Peter Page.
That's what I thought. When you said ball field and he started saying embankment, I was a little
Perky.
confused. Okay.
Before the water overtops the spillway, the area in red would be the area on the school property that is filled with water at that point. And again, this is only in one of the worst case scenarios. At regular storm event, the water will just be flowing through this culvert as it normally does. As you can see, there are about 8 to 10 feet of contours of elevation difference between the maximum water surface and that paved driveway up to the top of the hill.
Who's responsible for maintenance, like taking trees out of the culvert and stuff like that? Is that the city or the school?
For the property, that's where we're asking the easement and for property ownership.
Okay,
Those are the things that we would have to be responsible for.
Okay.
To maintain, because this is just like a normal retention pond, similar to the one in Logan and Industrial Park.
okay.
Several years ago, when you mentioned what was occurring, is that the school district wanted to give the property to the municipality for them to do that. So we wouldn't own that property anymore, they would. Obviously, we could keep it and they could still do the work on it, but we thought it would make more sense to deed it to them, is that what it would be? And could you turn around, could you show that to the people behind you, please?
Again, this is the area that would flood at the very top of this spillway. And that shouldn't happen even in a 100-year event, but obviously, you know, you gotta have precautions for anything even above that nowadays, so. But that would be the area that it would pond at the highest. And again, this is the top of the hill. There's about 10 feet between the top of that drive to where the water surface would be.
So how long would that water be expected to pond?
Well, we're gonna put about a 36-inch pipe down there.
Okay.
It might be a box, it could be circular. It would take less than 24 hours to dewater that.
Okay. And are there going to be precautions protecting that area? Because I know kids play back there and things of that nature. Gets done raining, they want to go play in the mud. I don't want to see them.
I think that certainly could be part of the design process, yes.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Nagel, you're on the same thing. I just asked make sure I was understanding all this correctly. There used to be, years ago, part of a trail that the cross-country team would train on. So again, I'd really appreciate it if that's all marked. I don't think we use it anymore, but at one point in time, it could be for them to train.
It's used by a lot of different people. I go running back there a lot. So you got cross-country people out there, you got runners like me, you got four-wheelers out there, motocross. So there's a lot of use back there. So we'll have to address each one of those independently.
That's it.
So you want to talk about the process, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I can address the process. So the two options that were outlined were to have an easement created to benefit the municipality, to allow them to do the work that is proposed, but the district, if there is an easement granted, the district would retain ownership rights to the property. The second option was that the school district would transfer a small piece of the land that is district owned to the municipality. And so the school code at Article 7 authorizes school districts to do that. There has to be a 2/3 approval, so at least 6 board members have to vote yes to accomplish that. There are a couple steps that would have to occur preceding the deed of the property. We would, I have a question about whether there's a survey available. You'd have to identify the specific land that needs to be deeded over to the municipality and probably subdivide what you currently own. And there are costs associated with subdivision of the property that the board will want to consider before making that decision, and decisions about who will own the cost of subdivision. The property can be deeded at a cost, or at the cost is determined between the two parties. So those are the general guardrails that you want to keep in mind, but it certainly can be done either way at the board's will.
And what is your timeline for your approval for you have to go through, I'm sure, environmental approvals and so forth.
Significant DEP permissions and permits on this one. This goes all the way up, correct me if I'm wrong, to a dam permit.
So it's going to take some time. So if we just have our solicitor meet with you guys and work out,
Our solicitor.
We can get Bob to,
work with your details and so forth?
so that's the overall concept of what we're proposing.
Okay. And then when we know more about the costs, whether or not we should just keep it as an easement or deed it over to them. But I know that the original thought was to deed it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions of these gentlemen? Thank you for your presentation. And is it possible to email a picture of that to us, that diagram, so we can, it's hard to really look at it from a distance? That would be great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I would like a motion to adopt the agenda for business items tonight.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Turner and seconded by Mr. Nagel.
Voting is open. Motion passes.
Thank you. Dr. Walsh, Superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mrs. Dobus. Good evening, everyone. This seems very loud to me all of a sudden. The first thing I want to do is to acknowledge that their motion on tonight's agenda for one of our employees, a 16-year veteran bus aide who came to us in 2005, is up for retirement. And I wanted to acknowledge and thank her for her service to the district as you accept her resignation for retirement tonight. The second is to welcome Mr. Cromie to the microphone. We've decided to add to our monthly meetings an update from Mr. Cromie on happenings throughout the district, highlights, changes, new information, etc. So this will be our inaugural performance of the Mr. Cromie show. We're all yours, sir.
All right, it's a performance now. But just wanted to get us started. Earlier in July, we had our 6th annual Camp Invention, which is a nationwide STEM program. This year's camp welcomed a district record 169 students, including 40 sets of siblings. Can you hear me? No? Oh, I apologize. Okay. This year's Camp Invention it had 169 students, which is the most ever for Bethel Park, including 40 sets of siblings from Bethel Park and neighboring school districts. So that's really a thriving program, and we're pretty excited about it. Also wanted to remind people about the Senior Citizen Pass. It grants you free admission, general admission seating to nearly all Bethel Park events. For municipality residents age 62 and older, you can pick up yours at the District Administration Building during normal business hours. Also want to touch on the upcoming Powder Puff football game. It's a Bethel Park tradition. I actually think this is really interesting. It goes back to at least 1972, which means that it predates Title IX legislation, which is really significant because women's sports in the last 50 years have changed very dramatically. And Bethel Park was doing a Powder Puff football game even before that, which is, I think, amazing. This year's game will be on Sunday, September 5th at 6 p.m. at Blackhawk Stadium. Everyone's welcome. We also want to congratulate Joe Serafini, who is a Bethel Park alum. He recently performed in the CLO's 75th anniversary, a Broadway musical celebration. Serafini was also recently cast in the Disney Plus series, bear with me, High School Musical, the series. And we're very excited for that. In June, Katie Mucci was recognized by the Pirates as an all-star teacher in an on-field ceremony held before their game against the Dodgers. And I also wanted to go through 2 Bethel Park baseball players, speaking of baseball, were drafted in July. They include Mason Miller, who was taken in the 3rd round by the Oakland Athletics, and Justin Mice, who went 97th. Justin, went in the 10th round. He went 283rd overall. Miller pitched at Waynesburg, and Mice pitched at Eastern Michigan. That's remarkable to have 2 players in the same draft. Also, while we're speaking of athletics, Bethel Park lacrosse goalkeeper Owen Peters recently announced his commitment to play at Mount St. Mary's, which is the Division I program in the Northeast Conference, which is the same as what Robert Morris used to be in. And also, Blackhawks quarterback Max Blank recently committed to FCS powerhouse Youngstown State, so congratulations to him. And finally, we had a campus beautification project over the weekend. Girl Scout Troop 52661 planted a pink dogwood tree at Benjamin Franklin Elementary School. And does anyone know how to tell if you have a dogwood tree? By its bark. Okay. I'll see myself out. Thank you.
He's here all night. Thank you, Mr. Cromie, and we'll also be pleased to see the return of the newsletter being communicated out.
Yep, in September. And we'll have that, and it'll be a lot of the information you see on here, or if you follow our social media accounts, there'll be a lot of that information, but that's really for people who don't follow social media accounts. So we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing is to confirm, and maybe a quick discussion with the board, there was a suggestion or request from the community to allow the high school stadium to be open on weekends. It's not currently open and available for walkers and runners to use the track unless there was some event scheduled in the high school. And had a conversation with Mr. Fierst earlier tonight about that, and he was comfortable with that if the board was too, unless there's some history with that locking the gates that I'm not aware of. No history. Okay.
No, I don't know. Did we close it because of COVID or something? Or, because it used to be open?
It might have been a carryover from COVID. We did restrict access during when we were in the full swing of the pandemic. And to my knowledge, the access really hasn't been reinstated to where it was.
Thank you for looking into that, because I know when we originally updated the stadium, it was to be a community place for walking, especially around the track and so forth. So it will be open on weekends and in the evenings then?
Yes, the only caveat is the lower level restrooms probably will not be open.
And Mr. Fierce, if possible, could we put a sign up for that? And if it, that it is open to the public? Only because I just sat down at softball registration for varsity and JV for the last hour and a half, and I was the directions person.
Yes, we will
Where's
put
the field? Where's IMS? Where's this? Where's that? So could we please put a sign up at least at the stadium that says it's open and
yes,
these are the hours? I mean, I understand we have to lock it at some point, but these are the hours.
Yes.
So that was all I had, Mrs. Dobus, but I'd like to jump back into the agenda when we get to the personnel matters so I can introduce some folks to the board.
Okay, sounds good. At this time, we have public comments on agenda items, and we have invited Dr. Timothy Campbell to come and speak to us at this time as the first speaker for public comments, and you can use more than the 2 minutes if you need to. He's an esteemed community member. He used to be on the school board when I first was on the school board, and now he is on the town council. So as the doctor who really facilitated a lot of the vaccination that went through Spartan Pharmacy, we thought that it would be good to hear a medical professional talk to us.
President Dobos, thank you. Dr. Walsh, esteemed school board directors. Vince, I used to sit in your seat. I was there for a good 4 years. That was 6 to 10 years ago.
I took your spot.
How'd you end up on that side of the table?
I was over there, yeah. I replaced you, yeah.
But folks, tonight I was invited to speak specifically as an informational, to provide some data to help you in your deliberations as far as what to do, how to move forward with PPE, how to move forward with some suggestions for how to handle this upcoming school year. And you're wondering, who's this guy in front of you? I'm an internal medicine doctor by training. I also double boarded in palliative and hospice medicine. But I also serve on a federal DMAT team. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that. DMAT's Disaster Medical Assistance Team. So if there's a hurricane or an earthquake or, God forbid, COVID, They could pluck a number of us from Pennsylvania. We have a team of about 36 people. They could send us anywhere in the nation. We could set up a hospital in about 2.5 hours. We could treat 250 people a day. It's amazing to see. It's amazing to see. So I was actually first involved with COVID. I just want to give you a little bit of background, let you know that I've got a few ninja skills along these lines. I was involved in COVID from the very beginning. My team was dispatched and deployed to Travis Air Force Base in January and February of 2020. So the folks who are coming out of Wuhan City in China, the folks who are coming off the Diamond Princess, we were the first people to go ahead and treat them in the United States, the first COVID patients. And those are U.S. citizens who were being repatriated to the United States, and we had to set up the quarantine standards, the protocols for handling them. And it was pretty much flying by the seat of our pants at that time, rediscovering the wheel. I had CDC on my left-hand side, I had United States Public Health on my right side, and I was the chief medical officer for that event, for the incident management team. After that, I'd had multiple other deployments through the course of the year. Some of them were air medical evacuation, moving COVID patients in airplanes to take them to other ICUs throughout the country. We also worked in border hospitals that were overrun with COVID. So a lot of these hospitals that had like maybe 20-bed ICUs, they would end up having 90 people on ventilators. So my team was tasked with converting floor beds into units.
Hey, Dr. Campbell, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you hold your mic a little bit closer? Just because we're televising this over YouTube, I think, I just want to make sure.
Barry, I'm grateful. I'm kind of soft-spoken anyway. I just want to kind of break out in song.
Sorry to interrupt, but
no worries.
I think the people watching on YouTube may have a hard time.
Thank you. At home, I volunteer to work with administrative sides of hospitals, administrative staff, nursing homes, long-term care facilities. We took the lessons that we learned in the field and brought them home back here to Pittsburgh to get what can we do to mitigate a lot of the nursing homes, for instance, that were overrun with COVID and putting it into play. My most recent work has really been tasked with educating and training first responders, healthcare personnel. We established monoclonal antibody clinics to treat people who are acutely affected. In doing so, we found we could reduce admissions 65% across the board of people who are high risk for getting sick and being hospitalized. We set up mass immunization clinics and vaccination clinics throughout the country as well. So as such, I think I've got a few ninja skills under my belt with dealing with this. We did a lot of work here getting the vaccination clinics in Bethel Park and doing some education here, even with some of our legislative staff as well. I appreciate wholeheartedly the tough decisions that you're going to have to make. There are strident voices and there are very strong opinions all over the map on this. I understand that. And it's for good reason, because who's our most valuable resource? Our children. You know, we want the best for them. They're our most vulnerable. They're our most precious. They're our future. So we want to do the best we can for them. So I get it. You know, having sat in that chair for what Barry took before he moved over there. So please understand, when framing my comments, I'm going to, I cannot separate vaccination from masking or social distancing. From a public health perspective, both are intimately, very, very closely related. And I genuinely believe the rollout in the vaccines, hands down, and the immunization efforts that we've done over these last 9 months have tremendously tempered the amount of human suffering that has transpired that we would have otherwise seen with COVID. I believe it really, truly saved many, many lives. We're getting close here in Pennsylvania to obtaining those levels of folks who are immunized or who have been infected previously that truly have that term herd immunity. As of this morning, I checked the data on the national sites, on Pennsylvania site. 65.7% of all eligible Pennsylvanians have had at least one vaccination. 56% have had 2 vaccinations or fully vaccinated. That's essentially 2/3 of our state population. And most epidemiologists, the doctors who study the statistics, the docs who really kind of love public health, they suggest that with a respiratory pathogen like COVID, which is droplet transmitted, okay, that only goes about 3 feet. That's why we doubled it. When we were in Travis, we just said, let's do 6 feet, let's double it, because we saw all these people popping positive. That's where the 6 feet came from. We know that in droplet transmitted drugs like illnesses like that you need about 70 to 75% of the population to be either infected and have developed a proper immune response, or have been vaccinated and developed a proper immune response before we start seeing the effects of herd immunity. So we start seeing the numbers drop and drop precipitously. This past week, there's published information data, the newest, latest great stuff, Pfizer, the Moderna vaccines. 2 injections now are known to provide 94% protection. I think that was 94.6% was the data I saw. Does that mean it's foolproof? No, absolutely not. 6% of people who are fully vaccinated will still get still get COVID. But hopefully, where our thoughts are and what we've observed are the folks who do get it, that 6%, they generally won't die from it. They generally won't get as sick as they otherwise would have. But these are the folks who are often be the frail elderly. We know that as you age, your immune system drops, and it may drop tremendously across the board, that you may not be able to fight the infection. If you have other comorbid conditions, diabetes especially, I see a lot of underlying pulmonary disease, cardiac disease, vascular disease, you have much, much higher risk of having a bad outcome or getting sick or dying from COVID. I remain optimistic. We're close. We're very close. Genuinely, I feel if we had had enough people vaccinated, I wouldn't have to stand here tonight. You wouldn't have to hear me blather on about COVID, which is something you've heard more than you've ever cared to hear about in your life. Many people don't know that 20% of every single cold that you get every year is a coronavirus. 20% of the colds. We've been exposed to this for millennia, centuries. We've had antibodies. We've been fighting this as humankind. I remember studying it 35 years ago in medical school, looking at the electron microscopy and looking at that halo, how it got the name coronavirus. What does corona mean in Spanish? Crown. Ah, that's how that came from. I'm full of useless information.
No, don't say that.
I'm not going there, Pam.
Useful information.
I'm not going for it. But this particular virus we see right now, COVID-19, it's not your mother's coronavirus. It's not a run-of-the-mill coronavirus at all. This one is particularly nasty. Do you ever hear of like SIRS, Southeast Asia Respiratory Syndrome, MERS, MERS, SARS and MERS? They were coronaviruses, but they had point mutations that made them so infectious that we were really worried about them, really worried about it. So the coronavirus we see now, it's much easier to spread. It's much more infectious. It's more likely to get you sick if you get it. And if you're frail and elderly, it's more likely to kill you or make you very serious or give you serious long-term complications. And yes, the Delta variant that we're seeing now, we're seeing much higher transmission rates with it. If you take a virus and put it in a big enough population, that virus gets smart after a while. It evolves. It becomes much more effective. The purpose of a virus is to reproduce itself. We're just an intermediary host as far as it's concerned. So it becomes much more effective. How many variants do you think are out there right now? What's your rough guess?
5?
Thousands. I know, I thought so too. Alpha, beta, delta, gamma, lambda. Go through the Greek alphabet. There are thousands of variants of COVID right now. The 5 big ones that we're seeing are alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Delta is what we're seeing in the United States now. A lot of the new cases, it's probably thought to be maybe about 80% of the viruses that we're seeing. It's really transmitting very quickly. Thank goodness, the COVID vaccine covers all the variants for now. But this virus will mutate. Eventually, it'll probably become something like maybe a seasonal flu. I told you, it's 20% of all the colds that we get every year, or the upper respiratory infections we get every year. Usually we handle it, but this one was so effective at getting into us and getting us infected and reproducing. That's where the mortality came from. The rates for death have stayed pretty much stable. We know that for many months now, it's been between about 1.4 and 1.7% of the people who get COVID will die from it, if you're unaffected. Who are those folks mostly? The frail elderly, the immunocompromised, those who have a lot of comorbid conditions. It's been my experience that most of the patients I saw and I treated were infirmed and elderly. But when I was at some of these border hospitals in Texas and California, I had as many 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds on ventilators as I did 70, 80-year-olds. That's scary. Now, are there exceptions? Sure. Most of the people who get COVID have no symptoms. The vast majority are probably asymptomatic or have minor symptoms like a cold. The chance of having a problem with the vaccine, is really, really small across the board. A major anaphylactic reaction is only 1 in or at 2 to 5 per million. In all the vaccinations I've given tens of thousands. I saw one minor reaction, enough for me to suggest to the patient, don't get a second injection. Don't get the second one, follow up. But the chances, so again, 2 to 5 people in a million may have a major allergic reaction. As far as you hear in the press also, especially with the school-age kids, cardiac disease, pericarditis, myositis, the inflammation of the sac around the heart and the heart itself. Or you hear also about like Guillain-Barré syndrome. We hear a lot about thrombotic disorders, making blood clots as well. The chances of that are 0.0019%. That's 1 or 2 cases out of 100,000 of that happening, related possibly to the vaccine. We don't even know if it's related to the vaccine yet or not, or if it's just background information. So compared to the risk of dying, 1 to 2 per 100 versus 1 or 2 in 100,000 for the vaccine is not a it's not a bad part of the equation. For me, that's a no-brainer. And that's why the vaccines have been made earlier than people anticipated. You hear a lot of folks will say, oh, the vaccines were pushed out way too early. Way too early. I wanted them to be tested first. Understand, historically, it used to take, with SARS and with MERS, it took 20 to 22 months to develop a vaccine. With the messenger RNA platforms that came out, they did it in under 10 months. Now, does that mean the FDA could say, oh, we got the vaccine, go ahead and give it? No. They still had to do the phase 1 human, the phase 2 human, the phase 3 human trials. They had to do safety trials even before it was ever released to make sure that it was safe. So that was what really held us up. The mRNA platforms were developed 10 years ago. Messenger RNA platforms developed 10 years ago specifically for this purpose. We knew that if we had to get a vaccine in a hurry, we needed to be able to produce something as quickly as we possibly could. And that's what happened. We have the time and still went through the safety trials to show it was safe. Sure, I understand the trepidation, but now we have millions of vaccines out there and with millions of data points under our belt. And most folks seem to have more problem with the common flu shot that we get every year, the trivalent or quadrivalent flu shot, than we have seen with the coronavirus. So I understand why we got the vaccine out early. Can you imagine the number of lives that were saved specifically because we were able to get that vaccine? Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of vaccines, rather than wait another year, when we would have still been in the throes of this otherwise. So, I wanted to share with you also, again, my job here is an informational. I had my chance of sitting in the seat. I made some hard decisions before, and I understand some of the machinations that you have to go through, and I firmly appreciate everything you do for our community, and especially for our students and their parents and well, everybody in the community. So I want to share with you the latest CDC recommendations. These aren't necessarily Tim Campbell's recommendations, but as of July 27th, these are the ones that were just published. 3 main ones that I pulled out of, like 4 or 5 of them all told. 1, recommend that fully vaccinated people wear a mask in public areas in areas of substantial or high transmission. Well, that sounds like a kind of a vague term. What's the substantial or high transmission? They break it down into 4 or 5 different categories. So I actually went through the CDC site to see how they define that. It's basically percentage of increases from previous cases. Allegheny County and all the surrounding counties, except for Westmoreland, are considered substantial risk for transmission with the Delta variant, which is going on now. Westmoreland County was a phase lower than us, I think like baseline or something like that, nothing really ominous. So the CDC has real online map information that's really of the active cases, and as of this morning, Allegheny County and most of the surrounding counties are substantial but not high rates of admission. The second thing that they recommended, that fully vaccinated people, again, fully vaccinated people might choose to wear a mask regardless of the level of transmission, particularly if they are immunocompromised, or if they have increased risk for severe disease from COVID-19, or if somebody in their household is at increased risk, or if they've not been fully vaccinated. And I think that makes kind of common sense. I mean, if I'm at risk, or if somebody I love and live with is at risk, I don't necessarily want to bring something home to them. I'll take the extra abundance of caution. I don't like wearing masks, but I'll put it on if I could help them a little bit more. Now listen to this next recommendation. This is specific to each and every single one of you. It's as school directors. CDC recommends, this is as of last Wednesday, recommends universal indoor masking for teachers, staff, students, and visitors to schools, regardless of vaccination status. Again, I can understand where they're coming from. Decidedly, school-age children, unless they have health concerns, they're very, very unlikely to suffer a bad outcome with acute COVID. But kids could be asymptomatic carriers. Kids may have minor symptoms, snotty nose, cough, little sore throat. You won't even think too much about. Maybe it's allergies, maybe it's a cold. But how can you tell if a kid picked up COVID from school versus playing with their friends afterwards at school? Or how do you really tell the difference if they were maybe picked up at a club or a sporting event, that they were involved, extracurricular activities out of the school property, or at a church activity? You can't. We just can't do that. We did all the contact tracing before, but found out that really didn't work as well as we thought it would have worked. It's not the kids that I'm primarily concerned about with the COVID, unless they're immunocompromised. Much higher risk are their parents, their grandparents, the frail elderly folks who may be caregivers at home, the sick, the ill, the immunocompromised. They're the ones that I worry about more because they're the ones that have the higher chance of dying. Brentwood, Broughton, Bethel Park, partnership with Spartan Pharmacy. Do you know how many vaccines were administered, all told? 60,000 vaccines. Mostly Pfizer and Moderna. Each person got 2 shots. 30,000 people in our area were completely immunized. Statistically, that saves, if you go about 1.4, 1.5%, 450 lives. 450 lives of our neighbors, friends, everybody, your family could possibly have been saved in our collective area by those 60,000 vaccines that were given. It matters. It really matters. This isn't rocket science. This is not rocket science. So, what does this have to do with masking? Everything. Because if enough people had the vaccines, we would have enough people protected. We wouldn't have to wear a mask. In Pennsylvania, they lifted the masking mandate in June, and we seemed to be doing fine for a while. It looked like we had achieved some degree of herd immunity. But who's getting infected now? Who are these pop cases that are popping? Who do you think?
Unvaccinated.
The unvaccinated. The unvaccinated are the ones who are popping positive now. And unfortunately, they're getting exposed to the Delta variant, which is, as I said, much more infectious, much more transmissible. So yes, predictably, we'll see a little bit of spike with them. So what do we do? Do we wear the mask forever? Absolutely not. I have no desire to ask masks. As soon as I was outside of 6 foot, first thing I did was peel my mask off and shoved it in my pocket. But we don't really have a lot of other options. We really, truly don't have a lot of options. Aside from my vaccination, I don't have much else that will protect me. Are we vaccinating kids? Well, yeah, Pfizer's been approved now for 12 and older, but what about those who are less than 12 years of age? What about our elementary school kids? What about those in the early parts of middle school? We don't know if the vaccine will even help these kids yet. That's being studied. We just don't have the answers to that. We don't know if it'll reduce transmission in these kids and in that particular age group. We suspect it does, but the science isn't there yet. But the kids, if they get it, again, as I shared, they're more likely to survive the events. It still needs to be studied, and we really need to see if giving a vaccine will help these kids or if it's better for them to fight it on their own if they get exposed to it. But again, what are the options? Mask. And even our data on masking is very soft. When I was on deployment, we used N95 masks, not the flimsy type of masks, the surgical masks we put in our pocket. Logarithmic difference as far as the amount of protection it can afford you. Masks are cumbersome. They're uncomfortable. They could be hot and sweaty, especially in the summer. They're absolutely no fun. But what are the downsides? There really are precious few. All last year, with all my deployments, not a single member of my DMAT team popped positive for COVID. And why? Because we were meticulous with our mask use. And again, we were using N95s when we were having direct patient care. We were using the other regular surgical masks when we weren't, when we weren't in a COVID-saturated environment. But we were in ICUs that were full COVID patients. We were putting lines in them. I'm putting tubes in their throat, putting them on ventilators, trying to keep them alive long enough that they'll be able to heal. We washed our hands. We wore our masks. We wore our gloves. We ate separately from each other, 6 feet. We would get in an elevator with another person, mask goes right on. You know, those are just the precautions we had. That was all before vaccination. And again, not a single one of us popped positive. We had no other options. The Pennsylvania Department of Health and Allegheny County Department of Health have not given any firm recommendations recently, compared or even augmenting those that are given to us from the CDC. We have heard nothing from them as of yet. I'm suspect that we will shortly. Pennsylvania, actually, compared to a lot of other states, in our region, we have higher vaccination rates than a lot of other places in the United States. But even today, this morning, the information that was released from Allegheny County suggested there were 320 new cases in Allegheny County over the last 3 days. That's a little deceptive. Of those 320 cases, only 198 were confirmed. These are the other ones probable or suspected. They'll use those terms. So those numbers are bantered around a little bit. School directors, I believe the next 3 weeks will be most telling. We'll see how the numbers evolve. We'll see if there's a sustained elevation in the number of new cases. And regardless, I don't think we're going to see anything like we saw last year, because we have, I believe truly, I'm optimistic that I believe the worst of this is over. It's not over for you if you have COVID, or somebody you love has COVID and possibly dies from it. But I don't think we're going to see the spikes like we did. And if you look at the data from this year with that amount of vaccinations under our belt, historically, usually 2 weeks after a holiday, we'll see a blip. We'll see an uprise. And then, because incubation time for COVID, anywhere from 2 to 14 days, that's why we isolate you for 14 days. Nobody's ever been shown positive after 11. So we keep it on the 14-day side for the isolation. But the average is 5.4 days. So it takes a while for folks to spread through the community before we start seeing that rise to occur. We see it'll continue for about 4 weeks and then it'll decrease. And we saw that after Labor Day, after 4th of July last year. We saw it after Memorial Day. We saw it after New Year's. We saw it after Thanksgiving. It's a trend. It's just something we could observe. So we saw a little blip now. When did this start? A couple weeks ago with the Delta variant? Oh, what was it before that? 4th of July. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, I pray for it, that we've already seen the worst of this little bump with the Delta variant here in Pittsburgh. We'll just have to wait and see. But I think some of the most damning and the most confusing course we could take is to establish firm plans now. We've got, 3 weeks before school starts, the 24th, I think it is? You know, that's 3 weeks worth of data points. Right now we're looking at a snapshot. I want to see the motion picture. I want to see what's going to evolve over the next 3 weeks. I think that would provide a lot more clarity to the community, to the parents, to the students, than necessarily making a mandate now and saying, okay, we're going to have to walk that back and then reverse that again. It might be the prudent thing to do is to wait and to see. It is a decision not to make a decision. If I'm in my practice and I have a patient with a diagnostic conundrum that I'm really trying to figure out, I will not rush to a diagnosis and rush to a treatment plan. I might wait for my physical examination to see how it evolves. I might be a little bit more diligent with my history. I might do what I can to grab more data points, more laboratory, more radiological imaging, so I can make a firm diagnosis and treat the patient right the first time. That's probably some of the best counsel I can give to you. The pandemic has been fluid. Our response has been and must be fluid as well. As we've learned before, we gather more data, we analyze it, we get a better understanding of a thoughtful, meaningful response on how to broach this. Let's learn, like the virus is doing, to adapt, to shift our responses as needed. And again, it's a hard decision you have to make. I understand that. But I think I would counsel you, and I think it's wise, gather more data points before you commit to a formal treatment plan, so to speak. I think that would help you out a lot in the long run and bolster a lot of community confidence in the community as well. Because I know, as a parent, as a grandparent, I'm watching a grandchild when they're doing the virtual learning at home. I had to change my schedule. It was bumps in the road for everybody. I know it was bumps in the road for each one of you as well. So I hope this was helpful. I just want, again, I wasn't here to go ahead and make any decisions, make hard and firm recommendations. All I want to do is just provide the data so you can deliberate and make the meaningful decisions, go through the machinations and the calculus yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. We really appreciate that very much. If I could maybe briefly summarize what you said. You said vaccinations are the key for the future for everybody, and they are safe. And you also indicated that we have 3 weeks to collect data before school starts. And right now, our safety plan is recommending masks but not mandating masks. And it's parental option, and that's what we'll be passing tonight. And I'll still have 3 weeks, so we can meet again if we find that the numbers continue to go up or that the children are affected more so too.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable across the board. Again, more data point helps, more information helps, and we've got the luxury of seeing what this little blip does. If historically what has taken place previously, this might very well decrease. And the number of cases, there aren't tremendous. As I said, 300 and some cases over 3 days, but of that, 198 were truly positive. You compare that to a year ago, trivial in comparison. So we need to let that shape our decisions as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Kim.
Sure.
Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it.
That was my bathroom writing this morning, yeah.
I just wanted to seek a couple points of clarification. So when my concern, just first of all, is throughout the fall into the winter, we made decisions to protect from community spread that necessarily were difficult decisions for all of us, and we had different ideas of what was best for children in particular. So my concern with this, while you say masks are cumbersome and uncomfortable, are we making these decisions for the unvaccinated to protect from community spread, and we're setting more obstacles in front of children? That's my concern. So.
I think masks are secondary. I still think absolutely emphatically the vaccinations are really what's going to make the key to this all going away, where we could put away the mask forever. As soon as we have enough folks who are really immunized. It's a shared, we're almost there. Is it a public health concern? Absolutely, emphatically, yes. Children are part of the public health spectrum. You know, they can influence tremendously what happens with, again, especially our most vulnerable, frail elderly. You know, so I see where you're coming from. I really, truly do. What are our options, as I shared? We don't have a lot of other ones until we get more folks vaccinated. You know, that's the bottom line. And yeah, masks are bothersome. They're no fun. You know, we don't know how effective they really are. We don't think they're as effective as we would like to believe, but they seem to be better than nothing. It's my observation also. My grandkids, they tolerate the face mask much better than I do. You know, they're much more compliant. But again, we've got wiggle room. We've got 3 weeks worth of wiggle room. Use it wisely. And then if necessary, yeah, have an emergency meeting prior to the, a safety meeting prior to the start of the school year so we can flex with the virus. Other questions, folks?
Yeah, I had one other one. On
sure.
In our last meeting, we had some people kind of speaking out against the masks, and one person, I think, talked about maybe the health risks associated with it due to the increased CO2 concentration levels in the mask.
Yeah.
And they cited a paper, and I went and read that paper, and it was a peer review paper, and there was a lot of comments in that peer review paper that question the measurement devices. Did they have the resolution, the accuracy at that level of CO2 concentration to predict it? Was the placement in an area where there was transient circulation of oxygen, CO2, you know, were they measuring it? And I was just wondering what your point was, your view, not your point, but your view is.
There's so many different variables involved with this, it's not even funny. Prior to COVID, I lived in surgical masks for years. I've lived in, every time we were in the hospital, if I had a patient TB or any kind of infectious diseases, I would be in a mask for hours on end. I still am. On my aeromedical evacuation missions, I was in N95s and the level B suits, the space suits that you see, because I'm in airplanes with people with COVID. And I wasn't able to pee for 18 hours because we couldn't strip out of our suits and had to remain in the masks. Did it affect our CO2 levels? No. But what if a person is a CO2 retainer? What if a person's in frail health? What if they've had like a particularly high acid diet, which is going or a high carbohydrate diet, which is going to make them produce a lot more CO2? There are so many variables that a study such as that, and I'm familiar with that one, you can't really hang everything on it that you want to, But again, folks are scared. They're scared. You know, they don't want to have, they want some sort of remedy. They want some sort of quick solution. They want to have an excuse, reason, not so much an excuse, but a reason not to do it. Same thing with the vaccines. Folks have valid concerns for not getting the vaccines. Some of my coworkers, if they were, say, pregnant, or if they're breastfeeding, or if they're trying to conceive, we don't have good data. We know that many people who've been pregnant on the vaccine don't have any issues with it at all. Perfectly normal pregnancies, no higher differences than the baseline that you normally would see. But